Chapter 1. The gun was already in Elias Thorne's hand when Kodiak knocked it to the floor. It clattered across the worn hardwood, spinning twice before coming to rest beneath the kitchen table. Elias stared at his empty palm, then at the massive Belgian Malinois standing between him and the weapon. Kodiak's amber eyes locked onto his, unblinking, unwavering. The dog's body pressed against Elias's legs, a living wall of muscle and devotion. Outside, thunder cracked across the Oklahoma sky. Inside, a 42-year-old decorated sergeant from the 75th Ranger Regiment stood frozen in the wreckage of another nightmare. 3 tours in Kandahar, 2 Purple Hearts, 1 Congressional Medal of Honor he kept in a shoebox because looking at it made his hands shake. Elias Thorne had survived IEDs, firefights, and a Taliban ambush that killed 7 of his brothers. But he could not survive the silence of civilian life. The nightmares came every night now. Sand, blood, the screaming of Corporal Davies as the Humvee burned. Elias would wake drenched in sweat, his heart hammering so hard he thought his ribs would crack. The VA prescribed pills. Therapy, support groups where men with dead eyes sat in circles and pretended words could heal what war had broken. Nothing worked. Until Kodiak. The dog had arrived 6 months ago through a veteran service program Elias barely remembered applying to. 85 pounds of Belgian Malinois, with a coat like burnt copper and eyes that seemed to see straight through flesh into a fractured soul beneath. The trainer said Kodiak had washed out a military working dog school for being too sensitive, too attuned to human emotion. What made him unsuitable for combat made him perfect for Elias. Kodiak didn't just sense panic attacks. He predicted them. Minutes before Elias's chest would tighten, before the room would start spinning, before the walls closed in, Kodiak would press his massive head against Elias's sternum. The weight, the warmth, the steady rhythm of the dog's breathing became an anchor, pulling Elias back from the edge of the abyss. In grocery stores, when the fluorescent lights buzzed too loud and reminded him of the generator in the FOB, Kodiak would position himself between Elias and the crowd, creating space. At night, when the nightmares came, the dog would leap onto the bed, all 85 pounds, and lie across Elias's chest until the screaming stopped. Elias had stopped counting the times Kodiak had saved his life. Tonight made it one more. He sank to the floor, back against a refrigerator, and Kodiak immediately crawled into his lap. An absurd sight, this massive dog folding himself into the arms of a broken man. Elias buried his face in Kodiak's fur and wept. The dog didn't move, didn't judge, just breathed, steady and sure, a metronome of survival. "I'm sorry," Elias whispered. "I'm so sorry, boy." Kodiak's tail thumped once against the linoleum. Forgiveness, unconditional and immediate. The storm outside began to fade. Elias's breathing slowed, matching Kodiak's rhythm. In, out, in, out. The simple act of existing became bearable again. By dawn, Elias had made a decision. He couldn't keep living like this, isolated, afraid, a ghost haunting his own life. Kodiak had given him a reason to wake up each morning. Maybe it was time to step back into the world. There was a new cafe downtown, the Riverside Roastery. Elias had driven past it a dozen times, always finding an excuse not to stop. Too crowded, too loud, too much. But today, with Kodiak's steady presence beside him, maybe he could manage a simple cup of coffee. One small act of normalcy. Just one cup. That's all he needed to prove he could still be human. Chapter 2. The Riverside Roastery smelled like hope. Elias stood outside the glass doors, Kodiak sitting perfectly at his left heel, the service dog vest clearly visible with its bold lettering. Service animal. Do not pet. Through the windows, he could see exposed brick walls, Edison bulbs hanging from copper pipes, and people. So many people, laughing, typing on laptops, living lives that seemed impossibly normal. His hand trembled on the door handle. Kodiak nudged his thigh. "You can do this." Elias pushed the door open. The cafe was busier than he'd expected. Every table occupied. A line snaking toward the counter, the hiss of the espresso machine cutting to the low hum of conversation. Heads turned as he entered. Eyes landed on Kodiak. Some smiled. Others looked away quickly. uncomfortable with the visible reminder of invisible wounds. Elias kept his gaze forward, focusing on the chalkboard menu behind the counter. Black coffee. Simple. He could order black coffee and leave. Baby steps. He made it 3 feet inside before a woman's voice cut through the ambient noise. "Excuse me, sir." Elias turned. The manager, mid-30s, blonde hair pulled into severe bun, name tag reading Claire Morrison, stood with her arms crossed, blocking his path to the counter. "I'm sorry, but we don't allow dogs in here." Her voice was loud enough that conversations nearby stopped. Health code violation. Elias's throat tightened. He's a service dog. I'm a disabled veteran, under the ADA. "I understand that," Claire interrupted, her smile thin in practice, "but we have customers with allergies. And frankly, I can't verify if that's a real service animal or just a pet with a vest you bought online." The cafe had gone silent now. 20 pairs of eyes watching, judging. Elias felt his chest constricting, the familiar pressure building behind his sternum. His vision started to tunnel. Kodiak immediately pressed against his leg, then sat and placed one massive paw on Elias's boot, the trained response for an oncoming panic attack. "You're only allowed to ask 2 questions," Elias managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is this a service animal required because of a disability? And what tasks is he trained to perform? That's it. You can't ask for documentation." Claire's expression hardened. "I'm the manager, and I'm asking you to leave. Now, before I call the police." A man at a nearby table muttered, "Just let the guy get his coffee, for Christ's sake." Claire whipped around. "This is my establishment. I have the right to refuse service." Elias's hands were shaking violently now. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The walls were closing in. He could hear the Humvee burning, Davies screaming, the crack of gunfire. Kodiak stood and pressed his full weight against Elias's legs, grounding him. The dog's warmth, his solid presence, pulled Elias back from the edge. But barely. "I'm leaving," Elias said, his voice cracking. He turned toward the door, humiliation burning through him like shrapnel. Behind him, Claire called out, "And don't come back with that animal." The door chimed as Elias stumbled outside. The spring air hit his face, but he couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Kodiak guided him to a bench 20 yards away, and Elias collapsed onto it, head between his knees. A young woman, a barista, judging by her apron, rushed out after him. "Sir, I'm so sorry. That was wrong. So wrong." She pressed a cup of coffee into his hands. "On the house. I'm quitting that place today." Elias couldn't respond, couldn't look at her. The shame was too heavy. Kodiak laid his head in Elias's lap, those amber eyes steady and sure. "I'm here. You're not alone." But Elias felt more alone than he had since Kandahar. He'd survived war only to be defeated by a coffee shop manager. What was the point of fighting to stay alive if the world didn't want him in it? Chapter 3. Elias didn't remember the drive home. He only remembered Kodiak's steady breathing in the passenger seat, the dog's head resting on his thigh at every red light. The way the world outside the windshield blurred into streaks of color and noise. By the time he pulled into his driveway, the coffee cup was still clutched in his hand, untouched and cold. He sat in the truck for a long time, staring at the dashboard, replaying every second of the encounter at Riverside Roastery. The humiliation, the stares, the manager's voice, sharp and dismissive, echoing in his skull. Kodiak whined softly, nudging Elias's arm, but the veteran felt hollowed out, as if the world had finally confirmed what he'd always feared, that he didn't belong. Inside, the house was silent except for the ticking of the old wall clock. Elias dropped the coffee in the sink, watched it swirl down the drain, and slumped onto the couch. Kodiak leapt up beside him, curling his body protectively around Elias's legs. The dog's presence was a balm, but tonight, even Kodiak's warmth couldn't keep the darkness at bay. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He barely moved, except to let Kodiak out into the backyard and back in again. The next morning, his phone buzzed with a message from his friend, Marcus, another veteran, another survivor. Heard what happened at the cafe. "You okay?" Elias stared at the screen, thumbs hovering over the keys. He wanted to say yes to lie, to pretend that the world hadn't just slammed another door in his face. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he typed, "No, not really." A minute later, Marcus called. Elias let it ring, but Kodiak barked once, sharp and insistent, as if to say, "Answer it." With a sigh, Elias picked up. "Brother," Marcus said, his voice low and steady, "you don't have to go through this alone." Elias swallowed. "It's just a coffee shop, man. I should have expected it." "No," Marcus replied, his voice hardening. "It's not just a coffee shop. It's your rights. It's every disabled veteran who's ever been turned away because some ignorant civilian thinks they know better than the law. You're going to let her get away with that? What am I supposed to do? Sue her?" Elias laughed bitterly. "I can barely leave my house, Marcus." "Then we come to you. I'm calling the VFW. We're having a meeting. Tonight, your place." Before Elias could protest, Marcus hung up. By 6 o'clock, Elias's living room was filled with veterans. 7 men and 2 women, all carrying their own scars, visible and invisible. They sat on mismatched chairs, the couch, the floor. Kodiak moved between them, offering his head for scratches, his presence calming the room's nervous energy. Marcus stood in the center, arms crossed. Elias got kicked out of Riverside Roastery yesterday. Manager violated the ADA, humiliated him in front of crowd, and threatened to call the cops on a decorated ranger and his service dog. A woman named Sergeant Reina Castillo, who'd lost her left leg in Fallujah, leaned forward. "That's illegal. Clear-cut discrimination." "Damn right it is," said a grizzled man named Dutch, a Vietnam vet with a white beard and a purple heart tattooed on his forearm. "Question is, what are we going to do about it?" All eyes turned to Elias. He felt the weight of their expectation, the same weight he'd felt leading men into combat. But this wasn't combat. This was worse. This was exposing his wounds to the world. "I don't know if I can do this," Elias admitted, his voice barely audible. "I just wanted coffee. I didn't want to fight." "None of us wanted to fight," Reina said gently. "But we got one anyway. The moment we put on the uniform, we signed up to defend people's rights, including our own." Marcus crouched beside Elias. "You don't have to do this for yourself. Do it for the next veteran who walks into that cafe with their service dog. Do it so they don't have to feel what you felt." Kodiak rested his chin on Elias's knee, amber eyes locked on his. The dog's message was clear. "I'm with you, whatever you decide." Elias looked around the room at the faces of men and women who'd survived hell and kept fighting. He thought about the barista who'd quit her job in protest. He thought about every veteran struggling to reintegrate, to be seen as more than their scars. "Okay," he said finally, "what I need to do." The next morning, Marcus connected Elias with a civil rights attorney named Joanna Briggs, a fierce advocate who specialized in ADA cases. Over the phone, her voice was sharp and confident. "Mr. Thorne, what happened to you is a textbook violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. You have every right to file a complaint with the Department of Justice and pursue a civil lawsuit. I'll represent you pro bono." "Why?" Elias asked. "Why would you do this for free?" "Because my brother came home from Iraq with PTSD and a service dog," Joanna said quietly, "and because people like Claire Morrison need to learn that ignorance is an excuse." Within a week, the complaint was filed. The story leaked to local media. A reporter from the Tulsa Gazette called, asking for an interview. Elias declined, but Marcus didn't. "Sergeant Elias Thorne is a war hero," Marcus told the reporter. "He earned the Congressional Medal of Honor, saving his unit under fire. And he can't even get a cup of coffee without being treated like a criminal. That's not the America we fought for." The article went viral. Overnight, Elias's quiet struggle became a public battleground. Supporters flooded social media with messages of solidarity. The hashtag Justice for Elias trended locally. But the backlash was swift and brutal. Anonymous trolls called him a faker, accused him of exploiting his service for attention, claimed Kodiak was just a pet in a vest. Elias stopped reading the comments after the third message told him he should have died in Afghanistan. The nightmares returned with a vengeance. He woke screaming, drenched in sweat, Kodiak's weight on his chest the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. Some mornings, he couldn't get out of bed. The world felt too big, too hostile, too exhausting. But Marcus kept showing up. Raina brought groceries. Dutch mowed his lawn without asking. The veteran community circled around Elias like a living shield, refusing to let him fall. And then, 2 weeks after the complaint was filed, the VFW organized a peaceful demonstration outside Riverside Roastery. 50 veterans showed up, some in wheelchairs, some with prosthetic limbs, some with service dogs at their sides. They stood in silent formation, holding signs. ADA rights are human rights and service dogs save lives, and Elias Thorne is a hero. Elias stood at the front, Kodiak beside him, his heart hammering. News cameras rolled. Claire Morrison watched from inside the cafe, her face pale and furious. A reporter shoved a microphone toward Elias. "Sergeant Thorne, what do you want people to know?" Elias looked down at Kodiak, then back at the camera. His voice shook, but he forced the words out. "I just wanted coffee. But this isn't about me anymore. It's about every disabled person who's been turned away, humiliated, told they don't belong. Kodiak saved my life, and I'm going to fight to make sure no one else has to choose between their service dog and their dignity." The crowd erupted in applause. Kodiak's tail wagged once, proud and steady. Inside the cafe, Claire Morrison turned away from the window. The battle had only just begun. Chapter 4. The courtroom smelled like old wood and stale air conditioning. Elias sat at the plaintiff's table, his dress uniform pressed and perfect, medals gleaming on his chest. Joanna Briggs had insisted he wear it. "Let them see who they're dealing with," she'd said. "Let them see what service looks like." Kodiak lay at his feet, calm and alert, his service vest crisp and official. The dog's presence was the only thing keeping Elias's hands from shaking. Across the aisle, Claire Morrison sat with her attorney, a slick corporate lawyer named Richard Vance, who looked like he charged $500 an hour just to breathe. Claire wore a navy pantsuit and an expression of practiced indignation, as if she were the victim in all of this. The gallery was packed. Veterans filled the back rows, a silent wall of solidarity. Marcus sat directly behind Elias, close enough to rest a hand on his shoulder when the panic threatened to rise. News cameras lined the walls, forbidden from filming but present nonetheless, waiting to capture the verdict that would ripple far beyond this courtroom. Judge Patricia Holloway entered, a stern black woman in her 60s with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. Everyone rose. "Be seated," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 3 decades on the bench. "We're here for Thorne versus Morrison and Riverside Roastery, LLC. This is a civil case alleging violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Ms. Briggs, you may present your opening statement." Joanna stood, her posture confident but not arrogant. She approached the jury, 12 ordinary citizens who would decide whether Elias's humiliation mattered. "Ladies and gentlemen," Joanna began, "this case is simple. Sergeant Elias Thorne is a decorated war veteran who suffers from severe PTSD. Kodiak, his service dog, is not a pet. He is medical equipment. He detects panic attacks before they happen. He prevents self-harm. He keeps Sergeant Thorne alive." She paused, letting that sink in. On March 14th, Sergeant Thorne attempted to purchase a cup of coffee at Riverside Roastery. He was denied service, humiliated in front of dozens of witnesses, and threatened with police action, all because a manager, Claire Morrison, chose ignorance over the law. The ADA is clear. Service animals must be allowed in all public accommodations. Ms. Morrison broke that law, and Sergeant Thorne deserves justice. Joanna sat down. Elias exhaled slowly, Kodiak's warmth against his leg grounding him. Richard Vance stood, buttoning his suit jacket with theatrical precision. "Your Honor, members of the jury," he said smoothly. "My client, Ms. Morrison, is a small business owner trying to protect her customers. She had legitimate concerns about health code violations and customer allergies. She had no way of knowing whether this was a legitimate service animal or simply a pet with a vest purchased online, a growing problem in this country." Elias's jaw tightened. Kodiak shifted, sensing the tension. "Ms. Morrison acted in good faith," Vance continued. "She made a judgment call to protect her business. That is not discrimination. That is responsible management. We will prove that Sergeant Thorne has exaggerated his condition and that this lawsuit is nothing more than an attempt to exploit his military service for financial gain. The words hit Elias like a gut punch. Exaggerated his condition, as if the nightmares were fake, as if the gun on the kitchen floor had been a prop. Marcus's hand tightened on Elias's shoulder. Breathe. Just breathe. The prosecution called its first witness, Elias himself. He walked the stand on legs that felt like they might give out. Kodiak followed, lying down beside the witness box, his eyes never leaving Elias's face. Joanna approached with a gentle expression. Sergeant Thorne, can you tell the court about your military service? Elias's voice was quiet but steady. I served 3 tours in Afghanistan with the 75th Ranger Regiment. I was awarded 2 Purple Hearts and the Congressional Medal of Honor. And what happened that earned you the Medal of Honor? Elias's hands gripped the armrests. My convoy was ambushed outside Kandahar. Our Humvee was hit by an IED. 7 men were trapped inside when it caught fire. I pulled 4 of them out before the ammunition started cooking off. 3 didn't make it. The courtroom was silent, and after you returned home, Joanna asked gently, I was diagnosed with severe PTSD, nightmares, panic attacks, hypervigilance. I couldn't be in crowds, couldn't sleep. He paused, the words catching his throat. I was planning to kill myself. Kodiak stopped me. A woman in the jury box wiped her eyes. Tell us what happened at Riverside Roastery. Elias recounted every detail. The stairs, Claire's voice cutting through the cafe, the humiliation, the panic attack on the bench outside. When he finished, his hands were trembling. Thank you, Sergeant. Joanna said softly and sat down. Richard Van stood, circling like a shark. Sergeant Thorne, you claim Kodiak is essential to your survival, yet you drove to the cafe alone, correct? Yes. You walked inside alone? Kodiak was with me. But you weren't having a panic attack at that moment, were you? No, but... So you're capable of functioning in public without an immediate medical crisis? Joanna shot to her feet. Objection. Argumentative and misleading. Sustained. Judge Holloway said sharply. Mr. Vance, rephrase. Vance smiled thinly. Sergeant Thorne, isn't it true that you could have simply left when asked, rather than creating a scene? Elias's voice hardened. I didn't create a scene. I was denied my legal rights. Or perhaps you saw an opportunity for a lawsuit? Objection. Joanna's voice cracked like a whip. Withdrawn, Vance said, smirking. He'd planted the seed. The defense called Claire Morrison. She took the stand with her head high, playing the role of the beleaguered small business owner. Vance lobbed her softball questions, and she answered with rehearsed sincerity. I have nothing against veterans, Claire said, her voice trembling just enough to seem genuine. But I have a responsibility to all my customers, people with allergies, families with small children. I couldn't just take his word that the dog was legitimate. And what would you have done if he provided documentation? Vance asked. I would have allowed him inside, of course. It was a lie, and everyone in the courtroom knew it, but it sounded reasonable. Joanna stood for cross-examination, her expression cold. Ms. Morrison, are you aware that under the ADA, you're not allowed to request documentation for a service animal? Claire hesitated. I wasn't sure. You weren't sure or you didn't care? Objection, Vance said, sustained. Joanna didn't miss a beat. Ms. Morrison, how many customers complained about Sergeant Thorne's service dog that day? Well, none directly, but none. And how many customers with allergies were present? I don't know the exact number. Because there weren't any, were there? You made a snap judgment based on your own discomfort, not any legitimate business concern. Claire's face flushed. I was trying to do the right thing. The right thing, Joanna repeated, would have been to follow the law. Closing arguments were brief. Joanna reminded the jury that the law was clear and that Elias's dignity mattered. Vance painted Claire as a victim of overreach, a hard-working woman being punished for a simple mistake. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, Elias's heart was hammering so hard he thought it might burst. Kodiak pressed against his leg, steady and sure. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Holloway asked. The foreman stood. We have, Your Honor. In the matter of Thorne versus Morrison and Riverside Roastery LLC, on the charge of violating the Americans with Disabilities Act, how do you find? We find in favor of the plaintiff, Sergeant Elias Thorne. The courtroom erupted. Veterans in the gallery stood and applauded. Marcus gripped Elias's shoulder so hard it hurt. Joanna allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Elias couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Kodiak stood and placed both paws on his lap, forcing eye contact. You did it. We did it. Judge Holloway banged her gavel. Order. Order in this court. When the room quieted, she turned to Claire Morrison, whose face had gone pale. Ms. Morrison, the jury has spoken, but I want to add something. She removed her glasses, her expression grave. The Americans with Disabilities Act exists because people with disabilities have been marginalized, excluded, and humiliated for far too long. Service animals are not pets. They are not accessories. They are life-saving medical devices. Sergeant Thorne didn't ask for special treatment. He asked to be treated like every other customer, with basic human dignity. Claire stared at the floor. The jury has awarded Sergeant Thorne compensatory damages in the amount of $50,000 for emotional distress and punitive damages of $100,000 to be paid by Riverside Roastery LLC. Additionally, I am ordering mandatory ADA compliance training for you and all your staff and requiring that you post clear signage regarding service animal rights in your establishment. Judge Holloway's gaze swept the courtroom. Let this be a message. Ignorance of the law is not an excuse, and the rights of disabled Americans are not negotiable. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell with finality. Outside the courthouse, the spring sun felt warmer than it had in months. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. Marcus and the other veterans formed a protective barrier around Elias, but he raised a hand. It's okay, he said quietly. I'll talk. He stepped forward, Kodiak at his side, and faced the cameras. His voice was steady now, stronger than it had been in the courtroom. This was never about money. It was about dignity. It was about making sure that the next veteran, the next disabled person, doesn't have to fight this fight alone. Kodiak saved my life. The law protected my right to have him with me. And today, justice was served. A reporter called out, "What do you want people to take away from this?" Elias looked down at Kodiak, whose tail wagged once, proud and sure. Service dogs aren't just animals. They're partners. They're heroes. And the people who need them deserve respect, not suspicion. If you see someone with a service dog, trust that they need that dog. Don't question it. Don't challenge it. Just let them live their lives. Another reporter. What's next for you, Sergeant Thorne? Elias smiled, a real smile, the first in months. I'm going to get that cup of coffee. Somewhere that understands what service means. The veterans behind him erupted in cheers. Chapter 5. The world felt different now. Elias stood outside a small, sunlit cafe on the edge of town, not Riverside Roastery, but a place called the Morning Cup with a sign in the window read, "Service dogs welcome. Thank you for your service." He hesitated. Hand on the door, Kodiak pressed close to his side. The memory of that other cafe still lingered, sharp as broken glass, but something inside him had shifted. The shame was gone, replaced by a quiet, hard-won strength. He stepped inside. The barista, a young man with a sleeve of tattoos and a gentle smile, looked up from the espresso machine. "Good morning. What can I get started for you and your partner?" Elias blinked, caught off guard by the warmth in the man's voice. Just a black coffee, please. And for your friend?" The barista grinned at Kodiak. "We've got a jar of peanut butter treats behind the counter, if he's interested." Elias managed a laugh, the sound rusty but real. He'd like that. He took a seat by the window, Kodiak settling at his feet with a contented sigh. Sunlight streamed through the glass, painting golden patterns on the worn wooden floor. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Elias didn't scan the room for exits. He didn't brace for stares or whispers. He didn't calculate the distance to the door. He just breathed. His phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. "Proud of you, brother. You changed things for all of us." Elias's eyes stung. He looked down at Kodiak, who gazed back with those amber eyes, steady, unwavering, full of a devotion that asked for nothing in return. "We did it, buddy," Elias whispered, his voice breaking. "We really did." The barista brought over the coffee and a treat for Kodiak, kneeling to offer it gently. "On the house," he said softly. "My dad's a vet. Iraq, 2007. He has a service dog, too. What you did, standing up like that, it matters. Thank you." Elias nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. The barista squeezed his shoulder once and walked away, giving him space. Elias sipped his coffee, the bitterness grounding him in the present moment. Outside, the world moved on. Cars passing, people laughing, life unfolding in all its messy, beautiful unpredictability. But in here, in this small corner of the world, Elias felt something he hadn't felt since before Kandahar. Peace. 3 months later, Elias stood in front of a crowd of 200 veterans at the state VFW hall. Kodiak sat beside him on the stage, calm and regal. The room was packed, wheelchairs in front rows, service dogs scattered throughout, a sea of faces that understood what it meant to fight battles no one else could see. Joanna Briggs had invited him to speak at the Veterans Rights Summit, a gathering focused on ADA compliance and service animal advocacy. Elias had almost declined. Public speaking terrified him more than combat ever had. But Marcus had looked him in the eye and said, "Your story saved lives, brother. Don't stop now." So here he was. "I'm not good at speeches," Elias began, his voice shaking. "I'm better at following orders than giving them. But I'm here because 3 months ago, I walked into a coffee shop and was told I didn't belong. That my service dog, my lifeline, was just a pet, an inconvenience." The room was silent, every eye on him. I wanted to disappear that day. I wanted to give up, but Kodiak wouldn't let me. His voice cracked. This dog, this incredible, stubborn, loyal dog, he pulled me back on the edge. Not just that day, every day. Elias knelt beside Kodiak, burying his fingers in the dog's thick fur. Kodiak leaned into him, solid and sure. The trial wasn't about revenge. It was about dignity. It was about making sure that every person in this room, every veteran, every disabled American, can walk into any public place with their head held high and their service dog at their side, without fear, without shame. Tears streamed down his face now, but he didn't wipe them away. We fought for this country. We gave pieces of ourselves, our bodies, our minds, our brothers and sisters, to protect freedom. And we deserve to live freely, too, with our partners, with our heroes. He stood, Kodiak rising with him. So, if you see someone with a service dog, don't stare. Don't question. Just see them. See us. We're still here. We're still fighting. And we're not going anywhere. The room erupted. Veterans stood, applauding, some weeping openly. Service dogs throughout the hall wagged their tails, sensing the collective emotion. Marcus rushed the stage and pulled Elias into a fierce embrace. "You did it," Marcus whispered. "You gave them hope." That night, Elias sat on his back porch under a sky full of stars. Kodiak lay beside him, head resting on Elias's lap. The nightmares would come again. They always did. The scars would never fully heal. But for the first time since Afghanistan, Elias believed he could face tomorrow. "Thank you," he whispered to Kodiak, "for everything." Kodiak's tail thumped once against the wooden deck. And in that simple gesture, Elias found everything he needed: loyalty, love, and a quiet promise that he would never fight alone again.